Welcome to the Anterix Industry Insights, episode 14. I am your guest moderator, Alice Moy-Gonzalez, and today's roundtable discussion is titled, Are You Truly Ready? I'll provide you with a little context to that question. If you think about the increasing cybersecurity threats, the ever-extended wildfire season, the higher frequency of extreme weather and natural disasters that are influenced by climate change and aggressive decarbonization goals, both at the federal and state levels, a group of utility executives and thought leaders will be joining me today to discuss how the industry is adopting digital solutions, embracing advanced technologies, and developing strategic partnerships to mitigate risk and enhance grid resilience while providing reliable and secure clean energy. Now, let me put that in a bit more simple terms. We're going to really explore how you get from the grid of today to the grid of the future, what proactive measures we should be taking as we navigate a variety of factors, whether they're planned or unplanned events. So joining me today are our guests, Emily Fisher, the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary and Senior Vice President of Clean Energy at EEI, Laura Marshall-Chavez, who is on the phone with us today, who's a Chief External Affairs Officer at JEA, Jacksonville Electric Authority, and Rachelle Chong of the Law Offices of Rachelle Chong and former Commissioner of both the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. Now, the goal in our conversation today is to give our listeners insights into what is essential to be prepared for those unplanned and unpredictable factors that may impact the grid, and especially our listeners that are utilities that are developing their private broadband strategies to support the grid of the future. So I'll just give you a quick background about myself. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategic Development at Anterix. For the first 6 years of my career, I was an RF engineer at a big telecom company. But 15 years thereafter, I've been focused on driving strategies in telecom and digital strategies for utilities, holding a variety of positions from sales, business development, product, and strategy. But I'll say that what I've learned as an engineer is that we often develop solutions. We make things work. But within business and strategy, we look at what problems we're trying to solve. And when you put those two things together, you're thinking about the best ideas and innovation. They really come from partnership and collaboration. So with that, I'd really like to invite further discussion with our guest speakers today, starting with Emily Fisher. As I mentioned, Emily is the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary and Senior Vice President of Clean Energy for Edison Electric Institute. She's responsible for managing EEI's litigation and legal affairs, covering a wide range of energy and environment, regulatory and policy issues at both the state and federal level. Emily coordinates and oversees the strategic clean energy engagements across EEI and across the federal government. Emily, welcome to this roundtable today. I'd love to hear a bit more about you in your words and what are the things you're most passionate about.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Alice. It's certainly an honor to be on a panel with Rachelle and Laura. I'm super fortunate that I get to do every day what I feel most passionate about. It is incredibly exciting to be working with electric companies right now as we try to navigate that future you were talking about. How do we provide clean, affordable, reliable energy to customers, people who are relying ever more intensely on our product, and a product that when I started working at EEI almost 15 years ago seemed like the problem when it came to climate change, and is now viewed as the solution. So we're trying to get as clean as we can, as fast as we can, in an affordable, reliable way so that we can do what we can as a sector to help decarbonize other sectors. And so that's a really exciting job. As an industry, we've already managed to reduce our emissions about 40% below 2005 levels, which is actually more than most other countries in the world have accomplished to date. We know we have more to do. But I'll just say I'm really excited to be talking to Rachelle in particular. Not that I'm not already friends with Laura, but I spend more and more time on communications issues and on the interrelationship between telecom and electricity and the work that we need to do together. So I'm actually excited to learn from her today. So thank you very much again for having me on.
Thank you very much for being here, Emily. Laura, I'll turn to you for a minute. So Laura Marshall Chavez was named JEA's Chief External Affairs Officer in September 2021. Laura leads and is responsible for the government's relations, media relations, communications, and environmental services. For over 2 decades, Laura has focused on improving outcomes for the energy utilities and customers and communities that they serve. She's held leadership positions at the American Public Power Association and with Edison Electric Institute. As Emily said, they're longtime friends. And also the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, also known as NRECA, that she directed advocacy, political and communications campaigns on issues including energy efficiency, renewable resources, national security, telecommunications, and climate change. Laura also helped create and lead utility coalitions that helped shape national policy on cybersecurity, utility emergency preparedness, and development of the electricity subsector coordinating council. Laura, welcome. I'd like to,
thank you.
Sorry about that. As we can see Laura, Laura, we know that you're there, and what I'd like you to do is just to give us in your words, what are the things you're most passionate about with all of the great experience that you have?
Well, thank you for asking me to be part of this panel. It's wonderful to connect with you and Emily and to meet Rachelle. I have 20 years and counting in the electric utility business. I've also done some time in natural gas distribution. And now at JEA, we are a joint service provider, an independent authority of the city of Jacksonville. We serve electricity to about 1 million people in Northeast Florida, and also serve water in Duval County and some surrounding counties. I am passionate, to go with your question, I'm passionate about finding areas of agreement and common purpose among all the utility and critical infrastructure providers across the country. We have so much more in common than we have that divides us. And right now, as we think about the national security landscape, our responsibilities to deliver our services, as Emily said, in the cleanest, most affordable, most reliable way possible, we all have increased urgency and increased responsibility to work together across our business models and across our particular service fields, work together among ourselves and with policymakers and stakeholders to find solutions that work for everyday people. So I've been blessed at every stage of my career to be able to do that and find common purpose with people. And Emily and Alice, you've definitely been part of that journey. So I'm happy to just unpack some of these issues today.
Thank you very much, Laura, and it's great that you could join us. And last but not least, Rachelle Chong. Rachelle is nationally recognized authority on broadband and energy issues. She's led initiatives in California on broadband, smart grid, and electric vehicles since 2006. Rachelle, as I mentioned before, is a 2-time commissioner, one being at the California Public Utility Commissioners, or the CPUC. She served on the Governor's Broadband Task Force. and created the California Advanced Services Fund at the CPUC to bring broadband infrastructure to both unserved and underserved areas in the Golden State. She also worked with the California Technology Agency on statewide digital literacy efforts. And also, she formerly served as the Federal Communications Commission commissioner during the 1996 Telecom Act. Rachelle, it's an honor to have you here on the panel with us. And like the other panelists, I'd love to hear what excites you. What are you most passionate about?
Well, thank you, Alice. It's great to finally meet Emily. I know a lot about EEI, but I haven't had the pleasure, so this is really great. And Laura, look forward to meeting you in person somewhere, somehow. So what am I passionate about? You know, I started my career in broadband and telecom, so I'm a really super deep expert on how all of communication technologies work and how they're regulated. And when I became a PAC commissioner, I was plunged into the world of energy, water, and I even regulated funiculars, so everything. But I was excited about energy because it just so happened in 2006, energy was really starting to move into some areas where advanced technology was important. So President Peavy gave me the electric vehicle docket and the smart grid docket. And so I was helping lead the first of the kind dockets in those two areas. And I also had demand response, which is also important. So I became a rare person who's pretty deep in energy and super deep in telecom. And because of that unusual intersection, I've been really starting to shift my practice from just a deep broadband telecom practice to also working in this intersection of advanced communications as it relates to energy. So I'm very honored to serve on EPRI's advisory council. As a matter of fact, I just got back from Knoxville, Tennessee, where I was touring their lab, which is amazing. And, you know, we're very focused there on figuring out how do we solve net zero. We talk a lot about cybersecurity, particularly with the Ukraine situation. And we also talk a lot about how to use technology to better the electric grid. And that's my sweet spot. So I'm here because I personally feel like the electric system is outdated. It should be taking advantage of an area that the US is supreme in, which is advanced technology and computer and artificial intelligence. So when I am talking to regulators, my shtick is, how come my smartphone is smarter than some of these electric systems? It's as simple as that. So it's an interesting area. I'm really pleased to be on the EPRI Advisory Council because I feel like I'm really having a voice there. And it's a voice that I think is not often heard.
Thank you very much for that, Rachelle. Yes, EPRI is definitely very active in this area. And it brings to mind when I started with utility telecom, this is around 2008. Emily, I think I saw around the same time you joined EEI. We joked at that time that telecom seemed to have been a conversation that was never bubbled up at the executive suite. Now, we know that utilities invested in private communications for some time, but the recognition of why it's important, really, again, it's to solve a problem. So if I were to turn to each of you and ask, if you were to not start with communications, but if I think about the problems that the industry is trying to solve, and in your role, respectively, what would be the top one or two that would be top of mind for you that's important for us to focus on, especially where we're able to help reduce risk or ensure that we can drive innovation? Emily, can I turn to you first?
I made a face because I was like, I don't know how to pick just like one or two. And it's like, oh my gosh. I'll say, sort of focusing on the theme of innovation. You know, when I started at EEI, I think my exposure to telecom was mostly fights about pole attachments, which is not a particularly fruitful conversation or particularly fun. But it has really evolved, and our efforts to increase the digitization of the grid, not only for our own operations, but also to support, I think, more dynamic uses of electricity by our customers has really forced me to spend more time thinking about how we use telecommunications equipment in our operations. So I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is as we increase the amount of distributed resources on the network, there are additional challenges to having two-way flows of power. We designed a system where power was supposed to flow one direction from large central station generation, on transmission to the distribution system to our homes. And now we expect power to move both ways, and that really requires a level of visibility into our operations that I actually, as a non-technical person, didn't fully grasp until recently, right? And so in order for us to manage that system reliably, we need that increased visualization, and that requires just a whole different level of investment in communications technologies just to talk to ourselves. And then in addition, in order to make customers better able to take advantage of some more modern technologies that would help them manage their energy use, we need smart meters. We've been enormously successful at deploying smart meters, largely as a result of some of the stimulus that was passed in 2008, 2009. But that also requires advanced communications equipment between us and our customers so that we can use those smart meters to give them the signals to use less power, maybe to charge their car at a different time. Maybe that's where we're headed. So I think that's an exciting challenge. How do we use this equipment to really bring about a modern system? I think on the flip side, I'll say something that's a little bit more of a concern. As we increase the number of points on the system where people are able to interconnect, we are also increasing the number of surfaces that could be attacked. And you mentioned Ukraine, Rachelle. The industry is always on high alert. I think Laura will be able to speak to this given her work on the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. We're always a little bit on high alert from a cybersecurity perspective, but the more things we've got hooked onto the grid, the more careful we need to be. And so we have this challenge of using technology to do really cool stuff, but making sure that cool stuff doesn't increase risks that we will become less reliable. So it's a two-edged sword, but it's generally a good problem. But it requires a lot of communication, no pun intended, with folks that we didn't used to talk to. I spend so much more time at the FCC, Rachelle, so much more time. And it's like learning to speak a totally different language, right? So good for you for having figured out how to speak both of them, because I am still learning.
It's a lot of acronyms, Emily.
It is.
When I became a PUC commissioner, the energy lobbies would come in for a whole year. I didn't know what they were talking about because they were talking in acronyms.
I'm a Clean Air Act lawyer by training, and I promise you, I could do an entire sentence in an acronym, and it would make total sense, except you have no idea what I'm talking about. So,
yeah, that is great. I think it's the awareness of the important use cases that the grid of the future is looking to support. Telecommunications is becoming more of a common language that we didn't speak before. And speaking of the FCC, I remember we went in with one utility. I won't name the utility, we'll call it Utility X. And the question was, what is an X, as opposed to understanding the utilities, because typically it's large carriers that interface with the Federal Communications Commission. So it's great to recognize the importance of telecom as a strategic asset. And Rachelle, do you want to build on some of the things that Emily was stating before?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Emily on the importance of integrating renewables into the system in addition to storage. Now we have new options. So I agree with her that instead of the one-way electric system that we used to have, it's now multiple ways, not even two-way, but multiple ways. We're talking about microgrids out here in California. So, and we have a lot of storage coming on in addition to the renewables. So there's a lot of flows. And so to manage those flows, that's one area where you really have to have real-time communications. I'm also glad that Emily covered cybersecurity for me, because this is something we all stay up late at night worrying about, and particularly during this Ukraine or other wartime scenarios. So one thing that I was very happy about from my background is that the FCC decided for the first time ever to dedicate a certain portion of spectrum, 900 megahertz is what it's called, to the utility and other critical infrastructure industries. I had never seen this done before, but now that I know as much as I do about the energy system, I realize that this should have been done ages ago. And the reason the FCC did it, which is what's critical, is because primarily cybersecurity. I think we realize now that utility services from energy companies are absolutely critical to the economy, to our health, and to our safety. And so it's important to give this critical infrastructure sector their own spectrum so that they can have private communications that are cyber secure, that will not be hacked by bad guys from the outside or from just hackers, because we've had a lot of incidents with hackers. So I was really happy that that happened. I was working on that at the time, and I pushed hard for the FCC to do it because I was a rare person that really understood both the energy security issue and could speak to the FCC in a way that they typically can understand. So that was a lot of fun. The other thing I think that I would like to talk about for a minute is wildfires. I'm from California. I'm a former commissioner, and we have a horrible problem out here, which is we have serial wildfires coming through pretty much due to climate change. So climate change is real. And so as a result, we are looking at every way we can use advanced technologies to enhance utilities protection. So think of wildfire monitoring systems. San Diego Gas and Electric has been in a wonderful partnership with UC San Diego and Alert Wi-Fi to put out an amazing webcam system throughout, particularly their rural, remote areas and high fire districts, to look for fires. They monitor the moisture levels, the wind, all that kind of thing. And then they also have a new technology called falling line conductor, where when a line starts falling from wind or a tree hitting it, the system can sense it and send a signal back to turn off the electricity before it hits the ground and can start a fire. So these are the kinds of things that you need instantaneous two-way broadband communications for. And this is what, in fact, the FCC had in mind when they gave this grant. So wildfire is a big deal out here. Obviously, it put our largest utility into bankruptcy. And so this is something we're very focused on. And then just the last thing I'll mention just for a minute is grid modernization. In general, we have to make our grid smarter in order to reach net zero in the future, 2030, 2050, whatever we're aiming for at this particular year. So these types of technologies are important to achieve that. And as Emily mentioned, it spills into the transportation sector with electric vehicles. It spills into the housing sector and building sector with appliance controls. So these are all important.
That's great, Rachelle. I know that both of you hit on a couple topics that may be near and dear to Laura. Laura, I think about what you said before, finding a common purpose. And I know that's what you did at formerly at ESCC, the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. But I'd love to hear in your words, what are the issues that are top of mind for you, whether it's at JEA, or the things that we could be focused on and it would be top of mind for you?
Well, I had a similar reaction to the question as Emily did. I'm a list maker, and I'm actually staring at my whiteboard in my office, which flags about 50 things that are keeping me up at night. And I'm not technical and I'm not legal. I'm the hearts and minds lady here at JEA. My job is to inspire our employees and our community and our stakeholders, whether they are interested, passionate stakeholders or in our stakeholder community because they are elected officials. And so my job right now is to tell all of them the story of where we are and where we have to go across all of these issues. And so I'm going to take us in a little bit different direction here and talk about people, not just at JEA, where I can look across our 2,000 employees and tell several small, discrete stories about our need to attract more people to our industry with specialized skills. I can to envelop all the issues that Emily and Rachelle and you, Alice, have laid out: cybersecurity, grid modernization, clean renewable energy, bringing customers into a two-way conversation, cybersecurity, wildfires and innovative technology, federal regulations that recognize how we do our business, that it's easier for us to get into the field and, on the wildfire example, reduce the amount of raw fuel out there in a forested landscape. All of that takes an enormous amount of people hours. And as a nation, as a set of critical infrastructure utility leaders, we have a massive need to find good, smart, dedicated people who will come into our industries, come into our regulatory agencies, learn to communicate with each other in a very clear way. We almost have a moonshot need to find that talent and create the webs of relationships that are needed to get us moving in the right direction at the incredible pace of change that's needed. I think just about the work that I saw at EEI on wildfires, or the work that I've seen across the industry on spectrum, and I think about all the person hours that took, and we have a joint mission, I think, to find the best talent and get it into our industry, get it into our agencies as well. You know, DOE is trying to hire 1,000 people to do more work for our country on grid modernization and resilience, and that I'm very passionate about finding people to come and join this mission.
Well said, Laura. It's funny that I think the common response to the question is it's hard to choose one or two key things that we're passionate about, we're focused on, or keeps us up at night. It wasn't a trick question, but it's one that I get with respect to communications quite a bit. We would be asked, tell us, what is that killer app? What's one single use case that private broadband will solve? And it's difficult to identify one, right? Emily, you mentioned a number of key themes, from decarbonization to wildfire mitigation, Rachelle, cybersecurity. And these are the areas that we see utilities are focused on today. Wildfires like San Diego Gas and Electric, there is a great demonstration that has been done with the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL, to show how you could safely integrate distributed energy resources onto the grid into their ADMS platform. So for that, you need fast, real-time communications, because these are mission-critical systems. So this conversation is really great. And Laura, just building on the ability to learn from each other, right? Utilities have often been told you don't necessarily compete with each other. It's one industry that you freely share information. So I think this type of collaboration we need to have more of. And I'd love to hear from you if you've seen examples of this type of collaboration in the past. Emily, I know both you and Rachelle participate in the rural broadband playbook because there was interest in utilities understanding how they leverage middle mile. But I'm sure there are many more examples of that. So any key pointers that you could provide in terms of how we could be truly ready to support the needs of the grid that this type of collaboration has been done that we could mimic?
Rachelle, do you want to go first?
I would love to do rural broadband. Is that okay?
Yes, I was hoping you would do that.
Okay. I'm going to avoid pole attachments, though. Emily, why did you bring that up?
Well, I have a happy pole attachment story. We'll get to it.
Okay, that's good. Well, I wanted to talk about rural broadband because this is an area that is really deep, a deeply passionate area for me. So first of all, I think I just want to say during the pandemic, it became abundantly clear to absolutely everybody how critical internet is to people. You know, when you're stuck at home, we had to telework, distance learn, talk to our doctors, get our benefits all through the internet. And if you didn't have internet at home, it was a complete cutoff from society and workplace. So the good news is for the first time, there's literally gajillions of dollars being put into rural broadband. But the problem is the internet doesn't stretch out into these rural areas because of the way it was developed. They're mostly in big cities, so we have to push internet points of presence farther out and build a lot of middle mile, which is the network link back to the internet from the last mile networks. So utilities do play a role there, in my personal opinion. Utilities have transmission lines that travel deep into rural and remote areas, and they have the ability to either allow middle mile telecom providers to put fiber along those to push the systems deeper out into the rural and remote areas, or they themselves, in the case of say a rural electric co-op, could become an internet provider themselves. And in fact, a lot of rural electric cooperatives are becoming internet service providers. One of my clients is Anza Electric Co-op down in Southern California. The land right in between SDG&E and SCE, and nobody would serve them, so they formed their own co-op. And what the general manager told me when he called me is, everybody is screaming for broadband, and I've broken down and I've decided to try to figure out how to become an ISP. Can you help me? So we got him a grant from the Cal PUC, a CASF grant, and he built broadband, and he has a huge take rate. It's like 80%, and it's very fast. And now he's pushing out with additional grants from the feds into more rural areas that he couldn't afford to do previously. So what does that mean for IOUs? It means they have to be open to the idea that as a community service, they should allow ISPs to put middle mile transmission along their poles. There's lots of models now in various states. Number two, if they're super rural, they might want to consider becoming an ISP. So how do you do that? You form a separate entity, obviously, because electric is usually a monopoly. And then that unregulated entity, because telecom is mostly unregulated, would become the ISP. And there's a lot of groups now that help electric co-ops become ISPs. So it's not that hard. And then finally, there's a ton of grants right now. There's 3 major sources of grants that have come into being where you can get a large amount of that system funded, if not 100%, in terms of the infrastructure build out. And from the FCC, you might even get 10 years of monthly payments to support operating and maintenance. So it's an important role that utilities could play. They are used to being community players, and we're hoping that more of them will step up to the plate.
Thank you, Rachelle.
Sorry to interrupt. I have so many members who are interested in middle mile. There was some specific funding in the recently passed, the end of last year, bipartisan infrastructure law, otherwise known as IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that allows electric utilities to maybe seek some middle mile funding or to partner with other entities to do middle mile. And it's a really unique opportunity that they might have. You know, we often already have infrastructure in some of those more far-flung locations, and a lot of companies are looking at upgrading their own fiber deployment to support their own uses, as I was mentioning, you know, to support that two-way grid, to provide increased digitization and visualization into our own operations. And can, you know, small stuff, right, Rachelle? You make it a little bit bigger and be able to lease that to some of those ISPs who aren't able to afford the bigger investment we've had some great success stories. One of my favorites is Appalachian Power, serves part of West Virginia and Ohio. Was able to get some legislation passed in Virginia that would facilitate their ability to be that middle mile provider, make those investments, and then partner with a local ISP. And you know, it's stunning as we're all sitting here online talking to each other that they brought broadband to counties in Virginia and West Virginia, actually, that had never had internet access before. It's bonkers. So really excited about that opportunity, ways to pair some of our own existing infrastructure and investments in our own infrastructure upgrades, and also help out our communities. Definitely electric companies, I'm sure Laura would agree with this, look at those kinds of investments in communities as, you know, supporting their overall operations, you know, customers of ISPs or our customers too.
That's exactly right. If I could just make one small point, Alice, in response to Emily. One thing I want to say is out here in California, we do have a proceeding on how IOUs can help broadband. And there are some issues, and I'll just raise a few. One issue is a lot of the electric utility right-of-ways are for electric only.
Yep.
So that can be a legal barrier that their right-of-way isn't necessarily for telecom. And then number two, they are concerned that they have rate-regulated infrastructure now being used for an unregulated reason. So we have had consumer groups come back to say, okay, if you want to do it, and we get why you want to do it, then you've got to pay the ratepayers back for the portion of the infrastructure you're now going to use for this unregulated business. So there's an allocation issue that comes up. We feel in California that you could resolve it through maybe a law or a regulatory policy, and then once it's set, you could move forward in a faster way. But we've had, you know, in the initial time, we did have a lot of pushback early on, but honestly, when the pandemic hit, the utilities really understood that they had an important role to play, and they have really stepped up. So I'm really proud of them.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of states pass that kind of legislation. I mean, it sounds like a dorky lawyer issue, right? Rights of way, but it's a real impediment. So there's some model state law out there how to address the rights of way issues, and some really innovative either legislation or regulatory decisions to help facilitate some of those cost allocation issues. There are solutions for sure.
Yeah, and I remember speaking with Mississippi Power and Brendan Presley, the former chair of NERU, and they have a great business model that I think they're very open about and are willing to share. So there is precedent. There's precedent about how ISPs, IOUs, co-ops could work together, and it's all to support the customer benefit, right? The good of the community. So Laura, we haven't forgotten that you're out there. Anything to add just on the collaboration between different folks to really bring the best benefits to the utilities that you may want to share with us?
Absolutely. I'll go back to some of the national security, cybersecurity conversations. I think we have a golden opportunity with this panel to highlight one of the very best cross-industry partnerships in the last 20 years, which is the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. That CEO body represents all business models across the electric utility sector, investor-owned, public power, and electric cooperatives. It was stood up 15 years ago, but reached a certain level of proficiency after Hurricane Sandy, and serves as a wonderful bridge between the private sector and our government counterparts. And I think we can honestly say, as industry participants, that it has helped advance the cause of national security and helped our industry become more cohesive, more communicative, and more prepared. I think, too, the longer it's in existence, the more that body is able to foster conversations between electric utilities and telecom partners, natural gas partners, many other representatives across our 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So it's out there as an example that I'm personally proud of having participated in. And it's something that I think we can do even more to tell the story out into other parts of critical infrastructure, private sector, and government sector across the country.
That makes sense, Laura, especially now with respect to all of the international events that's impacting our focus on cybersecurity. It was an issue before, it's even more so emphasized now. There was a NIAC report that was published a few years ago that emphasized the importance of cybersecurity on the electric grid. And it did focus on, in order to be able to achieve that, having a separate, dedicated communication system is part of the components of ensuring that you have cybersecurity right within the national grid. So very important topic for us to focus on, and your points with respect to the ESCC as a body and how it could help utilities figure out these solutions faster because you have more people coming together is definitely a great thing. One of the topic that I'd like to touch on is funding. So both Rachelle and Emily mentioned it a few times, having various sources of funding and the IIJA, the Infrastructure Jobs Act. What is your perspective with this opportunity as we are right now? I think we compared it to 2008 timeframe when there was the ARRA, but it seems like going from this to that, right? Love to get your perspective on the utility's stake in being able to leverage that funding.
I'm happy to start off on that one. You know, usually, at least from the investor-owned electric company perspective, raising money is not usually our challenge. We're pretty good at that. We're actually the most capital-intensive industry in America. Spend about $120 billion a year on making the grid smarter, safer, more reliable, all that stuff. But we are looking at the bipartisan infrastructure law and elements of it, like that middle mile funding, as a really unique opportunity to make investments in the grid of the future in clean technologies in ways that help manage costs to customers. It's an understatement to say that the last couple of years were hard on customers. A lot of people who are unable to pay bills for long periods of time. We have a lot of unpaid bills we need to work out and figure out how to help people along. So making continued investments in new technologies, and because I focus so much on climate change in my daily work life, so much money aimed at new clean technologies like hydrogen and advancing storage and electric vehicles, really amazing opportunities to pair our funding with some federal funding and some of the funding that's going to go to the states and make big changes that are going to be beneficial for customers in ways that also help keep costs down. And that's the goal. You heard both Laura and me say it in the beginning. We have to do clean, reliable, and affordable all at the same time. And so it's a really unique opportunity. And we're more interested in getting money than I think we ordinarily are. So
that definitely accelerates a lot of the key programs that the utilities have been promoting for a while. Laura, I'd like to get your perspective representing a municipality.
We are really engaged in understanding where in that 1,035-page bill, the programs reside that fit our mission. We were lucky in 2009 to be recipients of a smart grid investment grant. We used that to deploy smart meters across a pretty big cross section of our service territory. This time we're coming up to the IIJA and really trying to be deliberate about how we can use those funds to absolutely, as Emily said, accelerate toward that clean, reliable, affordable future for our customers. We're trying to do it in a lot of with a partnership orientation across our service territory. For example, if you think about electrification, we're probably a few years away from being able to say with precision is not even the right word, but we're a few years away from mapping out exactly where our customers will need charging infrastructure to be. But we already know that we import a lot of electric vehicles through Jacksonville. How can we work with our sister agencies to think about those first smartest places to really focus on fleet charging or charging at the airport, where the rental car companies are making major investments in electric vehicles. So we're looking at electric funding, water, middle mile broadband here too, and then also a very important fourth column in our approach is to think about energy efficiency, weatherization programs that a lot of our customers need. About 40% of our customers are it can be a struggle to make ends meet, but we want to approach weatherization and efficiency in a more holistic and thoughtful partnership approach than we ever have done before. So we feel incredibly responsible that if we're going to ask to bring some of those dollars home, that we're using them in the very smartest way possible.
Those are great perspectives, Laura. Thank you so much for that. Rachelle, love to get the commissioner's point of view on this.
Well, I've been slogging through the IIJA for a long time now. I have these spreadsheets, they're Excel spreadsheets where I've mapped all the places where there's a funding, and then I figure out how it's actually funded, who's eligible, and it's actually an amazing amount of money, and it's very interesting how broad the potential projects could be. So I've been primarily focusing on the ones that have a communications aspect, not surprisingly. So wildfire resilience is an area that is clearly funded, and I'm presuming that's because so many Western utilities are having issues with wildfires. And it's now state of Washington, state of Oregon, California, New Mexico, Arizona. It's not just California on fire, it's the whole West Coast. So I am really happy to see that there is some funding in there for advanced technologies that can prevent or mitigate wildfires. So that's the first thing I'd say. I'm personally excited about some of the money in there that will advance EV charging infrastructure. I spent some of my early career working on EV charging issues for utilities. And what I'm excited about is, we used to have this whole chicken and the egg discussion, like, people won't buy an electric car unless there's charging infrastructure out there to charge when you're on a trip away from home. Well, in fact, 80% of the time you're home and you charge at home. But we've been working on how do we get that charging infrastructure out. And I'm really happy to see the funding in the IIJA and the Biden administration focus on getting more along the interstate highways. And so that's a really great opportunity. And to move to a community point, which I know Laura will be very happy about, is I'm always concerned about how do we get charging infrastructure to low income communities and areas of great poverty. So there is some money in there that could be deployed towards funding for MDUs, so apartment buildings and large business structures, to put charging infrastructure into the parking lots and such. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. We've already talked about middle mile broadband, but I want to mention again, it's not just IIJA, which has a ton of money. But the prior act, the US Treasury Act, that was at the very beginning of the pandemic, there's a capital, I can't remember what it is, it's the acronym, but anyway, there's another big pot of money that came through earlier. And just as an example, California has $1 billion that it's putting into middle mile, and they've decided to do a statewide network that's going to run along the state highway since they have the right of ways and the easements. And then there's another $2 billion for last mile, which is going to go for unserved and unserved communities. And that includes rural electric co-ops. And it includes, you know, if a co-op wants to be a provider itself. So there's just a ton of money, not to mention the state PUC also has a pot of money, the CASF fund. So you could almost get the whole thing funded out here in California, as long as there's an unserved or underserved community, which they define as 100 megabits symmetrical speed here in California. So that's another area that I'm super excited about. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is I love that Laura mentioned some of the EE and weatherization issues, which is so important to low-income communities. I also just wanted to put a plug in for smart communicating thermostats and other kind of home-based appliances that can help on DR. Those are really important too, and there's some parts of the act where you can apply for some of that.
Thank you, Rachelle. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Laura, for all of those rich thoughts. I would say I've learned a lot through our conversation today, from the improved customer benefits, decarbonization, how do we get to those aggressive goals, to Emily's point. This country has really made great strides in that area. The rural broadband, creating partnerships, ESCC, EEI, different places that you could get information and solve these issues collectively. But I can't leave without recognizing that I've learned so much today from a great group of women. It is Women's History Month, and it's a great privilege to be amongst such great thought leaders in the industry. And if I had the last question to ask you, if you were to sit back for a minute and just reflect on the impact that you're making on the industry and future generation of young women to come, what does that mean to you?
Well, I'll say that I had a birthday recently, and I don't really like the number, but it's better than the alternative. But so I routinely forget how old I am, or I forget that I'm a grown up. And recently, I had a younger woman at our organization like tell me that I was a role model, and that was like I kind of got like hit in the chest by that, because I don't think many women walk around thinking like I'm a role model, right? And so it really made me think. And there's a person that I actually helped move departments, because she was in my department, but in order to be in the legal department, you really can't get promoted unless you're a lawyer. And she wasn't. She had a ton of potential. And I helped move her to a department where she could use her skills. And she's like, well, you're a role model. You've really helped me. And I was like, oh, we really can do things to uplift and, you know, bring the next generation along. And I hadn't really even thought about it. It just seemed like the right thing to do until she said that to me. And it kind of made me feel like, oh, how can I continue to help promote women in an industry where we often don't see as many women, although we're certainly lucky today to be amongst all of us. So I took it as a challenge to myself to see who else I could help find their path, if that's something that I am able to do.
Thank you for that, Emily. Rachelle?
Well, I'm going to take it as a role model in terms of being a commissioner. I was the very first Asian American commissioner ever of the FCC, male or female, and the first Asian American California PUC commissioner, male or female. So from the age of 34, I became a role model, whether I wanted to or not. So I was very proud of that, and I still am proud of that, because, you know, since then we've had more. And what's interesting for me is at the FCC, just as an example, prior to my era, there was only one single woman who would be on the commission, kind of like the token, right? But then Clinton, he put two of us on at once, Susan Ness and I, and that was considered like a big deal to have two. Now, fast forward to now, here at the Cal PUC, it was similar, where there was usually just like one commissioner who was a female and one commissioner who was a minority. But now, just recently, we've had a commission where 4 of the commissioners are women, including the president. So, and at the FCC, finally, in 2022, 2021, we finally got our first permanent female chair of the FCC. So in terms of leadership, women have done really well in internet and telecom through the years, in the bar, leading bureaus and divisions, but getting to the very top to be chairwoman has always been hard. But I'm so proud to say that at both the commissions that I've served on, the FCC and the CalPUC, we now have had a number of female chairwomen, and it just was this decade, so hallelujah.
Thank you, Rachelle. I know you speak to a number of other women. I don't think as a younger woman getting into whatever field you're in, recognize the impact you're making at that point in time. Until, to your point, Emily, someone else comes in, new into the organization, makes that comment to you, right? That you realize, wow, this is making such a great impact. And Laura, I know you have a lot of stories we've shared in the past. I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Thank you, Alice. Emily, similar. I keep having those birthdays, and then when we come together for panels like this, and I reflect and say out loud, I've been in this industry for 20 years, and it has been amazing to see the change and reflect. Going back to meetings at 2004 at FERC or FCC in 2004, when I would be the only woman, and I don't feel so alone anymore. And there's a lot of great women who have helped that to be the case. I had a great experience this morning. It would be really easy for me to stay in my office at our headquarters tower and be on WebExes all day and flip my spreadsheets around. Rachelle, you're my spreadsheet sister. I have so many on the Infrastructure Act. But this morning, I got on an electric bus and went out to tour one of our solar farms. And the whole tour was led by this fantastic young woman I had not had a chance to meet yet. She's been with us for 6 years. She's a chemical engineer and another kind of engineer. She did the most beautiful job in the world of explaining this, what looks like a simple 80-acre solar farm. She took a group of people far beyond her years with diverse interests. She took them through why it's not as simple as it looks, all the complex thought that goes in across planning, finance, siting, regulations. She brought the story of how that solar farm came to Jacksonville. She brought that story to life. And I'm just so grateful that I stepped away from the desk and came out into the world and found her. And now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we've got an IRP going on. She needs to be in the mix with our infrastructure conversation. So I think, there are so many wonderful people coming into our industry, and I hope that I continue to be able to go out and find them and hear them and bring them into more and more of our work.
That's excellent to hear, Laura. It makes me think of, as you said, sometimes we don't recognize the impact of us being there and looking around the room, this virtual room, and seeing, wow, we're not the only person here. And looking forward, maybe a year, 5 years from now, this should be the norm. I remember one person said to me, sometimes you have to see her to become her. And I just would like to thank each one of you. This has been such a great conversation as we try to touch on 1 or 2 topics, but as you see, it is a big undertaking for us to get from the grid of today to the grid of the future. And there's no one person or one entity that would solve it by themselves. This really takes a collective effort, collective voices that comes together. And I'm just amazed to be among such great thought leaders today. So thank you very much and look forward to seeing you soon.